Hello and welcome. Today's guest is Chris Lenyk, a devoted husband and father and active duty Air Force officer with a remarkable journey in real estate investing and a passion for helping others succeed. With over 21 years of military service and a PhD in nuclear engineering, Chris brings a unique perspective to the table. Chris and his wife stumbled into real estate investing back in 2010 after being forced to relocate due to a change of military station, starting as out-of-state landlords with no experience. Their journey has shaped their outlook on the importance of investing in yourself through education and growing your network to support your dreams. Over the years, they've transitioned from residential to commercial multifamily investing, culminating in the successful acquisition of a 13-unit boutique hotel in North Carolina this past year with Chris's team, Ascendancy Real Estate Services. Beyond real estate, Chris is passionate about meditation and has worked for nearly 15 years with Tibetan monks, nuns, yogis, and yoginis through private, personalized instruction in a rigorous formal meditation program. He believes in the transformative power of internal growth and applies this philosophy to his investing strategy and team building efforts. Join us as Chris shares his insights, experiences, and vision for the future, including his goal of providing housing to thousands of monastics in need. Chris, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tracy. Wonderful introduction. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you. Why don't you start just kind of briefly walking us through your journey from unintentional landlord to now purchasing a hotel and kind of what that transition was like for you?
Sure. So you mentioned in the intro, the goal was, it was never in the plan to do real estate investing. If you met me 10, 15, 20 years ago, that was never something that my wife and I had in mind. We had bought in Florida in around 2007 because the rents were so high and we needed a place to live. Everything was going well for about 6 months or so, and we had a foreclosure and lost about 120K on the home overnight. Based on when we bought, there were for folks that maybe were or in the military, that might be seeing this. There was a program that was around that time, and there was a cutoff where if you had met before that, the government was actually going to help subsidize your losses. But if you're after a certain date, you couldn't recoup those costs, and so we didn't qualify. Fast forward, months at a time, and there were just more foreclosures happening in the neighborhood, more and more and more. And we got to the end and we got hit with these orders like, congratulations, you're going from Florida to Ohio, and you're going to go to Ohio in the winter from Florida. That was a whole transition in itself. But then, we looked around, we're like, what are we going to do? Both young, we'd only been married about a year or two at this point. Like, we don't have, 120K in savings sitting around. What do you do in this situation? And so we ended up talking to some friends who were like, oh, well, you could probably rent it. Okay, well, what's that entail? You got to find a property manager. Great. How do we do that? There's this person I've heard of, and that was how we got started, knowing nothing about it. We didn't realize that for whatever reason that people actually do this, that there was this
on
whole real
purpose,
estate
right?
on purpose. Like, hey, some people actually buy homes for the whole purpose of renting them out. No, had no idea. And then we ended up leaving the state in under about 30 days at that point. So we got up to Ohio. We were just kind of started the process from that perspective. And I every now and then I'll write a post on this, and I tell people like, oh, you want to know about a mistake in residential real estate? Ask me. Because if you pick up any residential real estate investing book and they talk about there's a mistake in it, we've made it. Sometimes a couple of times because we didn't know, and we didn't have a network there was able to support us and kind of fill us into, hey, this is a better way to do this. The only mistake we didn't make with the property when we started and throughout its entire lifetime was buying high and selling low. We learned the power of the long-term vision of holding on to real estate. And so that's what we did. And we just slowly learned these lessons the hard way. And as we were getting towards the end of looking at exiting out of that property and taking all these lessons, my wife and I, we actually had kind of a very sort of heart-to-heart talk. And it was like, okay, hey, look, we're gonna make a decent amount when we go to sell this because the market is exploding. It's like, what do we want to do? We really got our teeth kicked in doing this. Do we want to just take our toys and go home? That was actually the language we used. I was like, hey, we want to take the toys and go home? Like, you got a nice little profit here. Or do we want to figure out how to do this better? And we both said, hey, we want to do this better. We'd started reading some books. We found like the Rich Dad Poor Dad series, so we'd started that. And we're like, oh wow, hey, look at this. It's a lot of stuff that's in here. It's all kind of nicely laid out. And then we said, well, you know what? If we're going to do this, really, I think the way to do this is at scale. we should do commercial. We're like, okay, great. Do we know anything about commercial? And we both looked at each other and we're like, no, we have no idea about anything commercial. Okay, well, if we didn't know anything about residential and it was bad and we're going to up the stakes and get into commercial, we need to educate ourselves. And we're realizing at the same time, like, can't do this alone. Even on the residential side, you're pretty limited if you're going to do this on your own. And so we said, okay, well, who do we know that does commercial? And we looked around in our network and nobody that we knew at that time did commercial. We knew people that were interested in it, but nobody did it. And so we said, okay, we're just going to end up, scaling on the residential side. And then we're going to look for opportunities to get into commercial. And in a weird happenstance, we had bought about 5 more homes up here in Ohio. We were managing those and doing well with those. And one of a contact that I had from over, I think 7 or 8 years ago at that point, that I had met at a training class, posted something on Facebook, and I made it kind of like, oh, that's great. Hey, we've got these 5 rentals up here, something. And said, I'd love to learn more about what you did. And she responded and said, well, wait, are you an active duty passive income? What in the world's that? She's like, hey, you need to get over there and check this out. And so at that point, I joined into this Facebook group, found some stuff that was in there, tracked down some different posts and things, and ended up on a conversation and a call to get into their multifamily academy that was there. And that was really the start then of the transition from the residential piece into the commercial side. It was eye-opening. There were some terms that I had heard of, but then going through that and getting to see all the different facets and components and getting that base level of education was just absolutely phenomenal of increasing my understanding and education as an investor. And it was at that time, from my background in science, they were showing us different things. And I was like, oh, investor relations. I'm like, I'm kind of a scientist. I'm probably not the best person to be out there talking to a bunch of folks. And I think most people on my team will tell you that too. They're like, yeah, he'll go and talk to folks, but he's probably not the best person to do that. And you'll watch it take kind of a toll on him. And so we got to this underwriting thing and I was like, oh, look, numbers. Well, I like numbers. I do numbers every day.
For me.
I was like, oh, look, it's just addition and subtraction. Oh, neat. There's a summation thing for this R thing. Okay, neat. Yeah, this all kind of makes sense. Great. This is fun. And I ended up falling in love with it from that perspective and kind of just put it in there and started developing some tools and having a blast. And what I found out was from my background, that was a skill that I could bring a lot of value to others just from, having invested in myself with the engineering background and just liking numbers. I was like, oh, hey, this is just a natural fit for me to do. And I can kind of help explain this to others and I'm comfortable with it. And from there, we had an accountability group. We formed up. We had an introvert that was like, hey, I'm looking for folks to do an accountability group, or extrovert, sorry. And 4 introverts joined her and she was like, wow, okay. So I'm the only extrovert here. It's like, thank you. All the introverts are very happy to be here.
That's awesome.
And from there, actually, our team formed. And we went on to we just started the process of, okay, how do we create deal flow? How do we make connections? Meet brokers, develop our processes. And sure enough, we were still in the ADPI community, very involved in all of the calls and things. And then one night on one of the calls, someone was talking about presenting a hotel that they were looking at buying. And I was like, oh, that's so neat. And we've been looking at all of these, apartment complexes. And I just posted in the chat. I was like, oh man, hey, that's so cool. I haven't seen anybody buy a hotel. I want to follow on how you do this. Like, I don't care. I just want to see.
Yeah, just to learn.
Yeah. I haven't seen anybody buy a hotel. How do you do this? And the response I got back was, hey, do you want to partner? And I said, well, I have a team, we need to ask them. Oh, great. Do they want to partner? I don't know. Let me go ask them. And so went back and asked and said, okay, does anybody know this person? And we started talking about it. About 2 to 3 weeks after that, I was down on a family vacation in Disney. And, we're sitting there eating, I think it was gelato, and we're on this call. And my wife is looking at me and she's like, hey, we're here with the kids. I was like, yeah, but we're having this conversation. I'll be off in a minute. And we ended up hanging up the call and she looks at me and I'm all smiling. And she's like, what's going on? I said, well, I think we're buying a hotel. And that was how we started into and did our first commercial acquisition. Yeah.
Love it. You covered so much good stuff there. So let's kind of go back, one thing at a time and kind of review. So I know you talked about early on in the process, you learned a lot of lessons by experience, right? Because you didn't know
Yes.
anybody. You didn't even
Mhm.
really know what questions to ask. It was just sort of like trial by fire. And, you learned a lot of things going through that process. Can you share with us maybe one or two of those, early takeaways that you learned that you've been able to kind of apply and not repeat those same mistakes again?
Sure. So one of the two big ones really that cost us the most, both in time and money, were in vetting the PM and
Mm,
then vetting the contractors that either you're going to use or that the PM is recommending. And the reason for that was we found out, and in a very hard way, that the PM was not actually visiting the property and taking care of it the way that they were supposed to and providing us the information that we needed. And so there were a lot of things that we found that we thought were being taken care of that were in fact not.
mm,
Whether that was maintenance, CapEx, any of those things where we thought were occurring, it wasn't. And we found out as through a series of conversations when we were prepping to go and sell the property that it was like, oh well, by the way, there's your entire floor is damaged. Well, why is the entire floor damaged? Oh well, because there were leaks in the window. Okay, well, that didn't happen overnight. We haven't been down here in a little bit because we're living out of state. When did the leak occur? Oh, well, we don't know. Oh, by the way, your AC is broken too, and it's been streaming out into the street, and that's why all your neighbors have been sending you letters. So there were a lot of things like that that we ended up learning. Found out as well that despite what we started getting more sophisticated, like, hey, this is what we're seeing, where we think rents should be. Why are you constantly recommending lower rents to us? We found out that there were some other issues that were going on with how they were deriving their rents, how they were doing their tenant screening process, how they were then there were some other things that were happening behind the scenes on that front. And that ended up costing us quite a bit as well. The other one that we learned on screening the contractors was make sure, especially because these can be pretty small communities at times, especially if you're in a local area.
mhm.
What we found out was we're like, okay, hey, we have some maintenance that needs to be done. Recommend a contractor to us. We're looking at a couple. What are you seeing? Oh, we recommend this person. And what we found was that those were all they had a familial relation. And so the work that was being done at an inflated price and at a subpar quality. But we didn't know that until we really started digging into, okay, we see the bill, we see that it's been fixed. Okay, why is it automatically failing again? Can we call them back? Oh no, we need to redo that again. So very, very expensive lessons, very hard won lessons. Won't forget them, but
Mhm.
boy, they're unpleasant to go through. But at the end of the day, it makes you a better person. It makes you a smarter, hopefully a smarter, right, investor to realize like, okay, this needs to become part of my process when I'm looking at how am I going to bet this individual or this component of the business. What am I doing to make sure that property manager, how am I getting the referrals on them? How am I making sure that I'm not getting isolated and only hearing the opinions that either they want me to hear or that I want to hear? I need to get that full picture on all of those.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like those are lessons that, although they were very difficult to go through, have really prepared you well, particularly as an underwriter as well, to kind of know what are those questions, those sort of secondary and tertiary layer questions that you need to ask as you're vetting the teams that you're bringing on to make sure that what they're going to do and what they're bringing to you are things that are in alignment with what your underlying assumptions are.
Absolutely. And there are things as well when I'm looking at, each individual line item that I pay very close attention to where it's like, huh, okay, why do you have a reoccurring expense here that seems above what it should be?
Hmm.
So is that an indication of your management processes? Is that an indication of the contractors that you're using? Is that an indication of underlying structural issues with the property? What's happening here? Because that is not in line with how a property should be operating. It's a number, and that's great, but what is that number actually telling me about what is happening here with this individual asset? Yeah, that is a lesson that I have carried forward from the experiences of the residential. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that kind of honing in on like all of those numbers tell a story, right? Each
Mm.
of them means something and being able to kind of like read between the lines and not just see the number, but see what's missing or what, to somebody who is uneducated, it just looks like a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet, but you look at it and it's like certain numbers jump out in bold because it's like, oh, something's going on over here. Like, what is that? And you know which string to kind of pull to dig in and really figure out what's going on.
It's funny because to me, people like the numbers tell a story, and it is in my mind. This is kind of like, I mean, this is like, I guess, how geeky I am, right? So when I'm looking at each individual line item, to me, it does. I actually craft a narrative in my head, like, oh, okay, hey, it was the summer cycle, and here they are, and oh, we needed to make sure that we had a good landscaping. Oh, and we found our best. And I actually have a narrative that is in my head as I go through an underwrite, because it makes it kind of, to me, it's a little bit more entertaining. And I'm like, okay, I can imagine the person mowing the lawn, or they're out there, maybe if it's the winter, shoveling, if it's in a colder climate. And to me, it brings the numbers to life and gives me a better feel for them, rather than just, a line item on a page.
Yeah, I love that. Like you literally see it like a story in your head as opposed to just numbers everywhere. You also talked about the importance of investing in yourself. And I know you talked a little bit about the active duty passive income community and the multifamily academy. Can you share a little bit more about, are there any other things that you did to educate yourself, or kind of how that foundation set you up for what you're doing now?
Sure. So a lot of the things that I had done, with ADPI came actually after I had started in my network. So as we started being a little bit more vocal and telling people, oh, we're doing these things, we started meeting people and they're like, oh, you should read this book. And then I started meeting people. They're like, oh, have you heard about this podcast? And so, the big one that a lot of people get started with, which was also mine, was Bigger Pockets. And from there, things just kind of kept building. So a lot of Bigger Pockets was focused on residential. At the time, they've started shifting more recently. There's been more commercial ones, but for a while, they were primarily focused on residential. So that was a huge component for me in the education process, was listening to other investors go through their process and where they were at in their different markets. And it also helped to shape in a very real way, making sure that one has the correct site picture. And because you would listen and be like, okay, they're doing this in California, and those are the rents that they're charging, and these are the things that they're doing. Okay, well, that's great. Okay, there's a coastal market over here. That's a little different. All right, well, what about the Midwest markets with where I'm at? And then there's a little bit of that, and one had to really start looking at the models that were being adopted for their businesses, and then what was appropriate for the area that we were looking at investing in. That was a crucial component, that education process. On the back end, like the stuff that is, we kind of mentioned this in the intro. The thing that a lot of folks maybe don't know is all of the other pieces and the education that goes on underneath in the meditation. Actually, so many of those concepts directly are applicable in the framework of real estate. In fact, to me, it's almost uncanny the way that the two overlap. I have not seen this in other areas of my life, except in this idea of entrepreneurship and in really in the real estate investing. And it's been a really nice kind of blend as a result.
Awesome. Well, why don't we dig into that a little bit more? And
Sure.
why don't you share with us kind of how did you get into meditation, and, what are the parallels that you see with real estate investing and kind of how it's helped you?
Sure. So we'll start probably with the last question first. What are the parallels? The real parallel that you see is, if you're going to be successful in entrepreneurship or in real estate, you really have to take a look very hard at yourself and realize that you are only going to get as far in this space as you're willing to develop yourself internally. You have to educate, you have to spend time, for lack of a better term, doing the practice, performing your role for a team. So how do you do that? So you've got to go out and educate. You've got to listen to what others are saying. You've got to read, engage with the community, and have a support network. So all of that directly ties in. From the meditation standpoint, you're going to do that, but it's going to be a little different. So I ended up getting into this in a kind of a similar way, actually, to the real estate. I had a set of experiences kind of far out there, so maybe we won't go into the exact details of those, but a lot of really far out experiences were like, that doesn't, in my logic brain, that doesn't make sense. So I started searching around for answers, and I had tried several different approaches, and they weren't really panning out. And in a weird kind of fluke event, I was at this other business, and there was this little flyer that they had, as maybe one of those little trifolds, not even. And it was kind of tucked away in this back corner, and I picked it up. I went up to the owner of the business, who was there. If folks are martial artists, you might know this person, Stephen K. Hayes. He's like one of the top 10 living martial artists. He happened to be sitting at the counter that day, taking care of, I think, some items. And I was like, oh, hey, what is this? What is this flower? And he's like, oh, that's for this Buddhist temple that's, down the way. I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, well, I'm really interested in this meditation stuff. He's like, oh, well, there's this fantastic nun that's there, but again, she doesn't speak a whole lot of English, and you're probably going to need a translator if you go there. But and check it out. Let me know how it goes. And so I was like, great, let's go check out one of these Buddhist temple things. I drive down there on a Sunday, and it's amazing because they had converted this old biker church. So you go in, and they've got all the stained glass windows that you would expect from a normal church, and then they've got all the things from the Tibetans that are there. The teacher didn't speak any English whatsoever, could say a few words, but for whatever reason, there was a connection there. And I had to wait about 6 months to actually find somebody that could translate for us.
Oh, wow.
And at the time, they kind of give you just these little pieces like, hey, just try this out. Just try this out. Very similar to what you do in real estate, right? You're going to find a piece that you can bite off and understand, and you're going to work with that. And that's exactly how the process unfolds. And throughout that, you have these mentors. They're working with you and being like, okay, well, what are you actually trying to achieve? What's your goal? Okay, we're going to, tailor your practice and kind of vector you in the way that's going to be in the most alignment with that. And each step of the way, it's like, okay, well, maybe you need to read this. And you have a community of practitioners that are there, and they're like, okay, I can tell you a little bit about my experiences. What are you bringing to the table? Okay, that's your experience. And they can help guide you in that capacity as well. For me in particular, that just became very crucial with learning how looking at one's own potential and kind of investing in that, believing that that's there to begin with. Then around this then springs this, for me at least, it's just a very beautiful and holistic practice that helps you to be the best version of yourself that you can be. Mm-hmm. And as a result of doing that and investing in yourself, you have value to the others in your community because you're smiling more, you're more friendly, you're able to help others that may be struggling either with something internally or externally. And from going through that process, as a result, you can, to whatever extent you're able, help to lift them up as well.
That's awesome. I think now, where were you when that happened? You were like stateside, or were you overseas, or
stateside? So okay. It was actually here in Dayton.
Okay.
If you kind of look at it and you think about, not to sound bad about Dayton. Dayton is not exactly the hub where you would expect to find something like that.
Yeah.
The community is fairly uniform. I mean, there's some variation here, but it's not exactly you would not expect the level of diversity to have something like that present in the community here. And yet there it was.
Interesting. So you sort of stumbled upon it as you were,
Mm-hmm.
In another business, kind of searching for a solution to, your own problem that you are working through, and just over the years have continued to develop your practice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so at each step, they will kind of ask you like, okay, you've kind of gotten through this. This is your understanding. If you get something wrong, and you don't have the correct understanding, they'll tell you to go back and keep working it. And then they'll kind of be like, okay, hey, there is a distinct difference. And again, this kind of parallels what we see with investing as well, right? You have sort of, for lack of a better term, maybe mom and pop investors, folks that aren't going to look at doing it professionally. Mm-hmm. They might go do a little bit here. Oh, I've got, one rental, 2 rentals, but, I don't really keep track of the returns. I don't do a lot of analysis. I'm not, fully invested in this process. It's just, so-and-so did it. I thought it was a decent idea. I did it too. There's very much that discussion and culture within the meditation as well. From a cultural perspective, they have that as well, where it's like, okay, the quote unquote lay folks, right? They have some form of a practice, but it's not maybe very extensive. Mm-hmm. And it's maybe not well educated or informed as well. And that just comes with a whole host of societal and cultural factors that, when you go outside of Western society, where things are going to be a bit different. And so they were like, oh, okay, well, you're looking at this path that, really this is more for like, some people that are going to be kind of serious about this and monastics. Are you sure you want to do this as a layperson? Like that's really unusual. Like, do you know what you're getting into? And me, just being me and not knowing, I was like, yeah, sure, I know. Let's go for it. Turns out there's a lot more that was involved. So,
And yet here you are
and here,
still on the path.
yeah, here I am. I think it's one of those where like, huh, well, we thought he was going to go away, but no, he's still here. So, okay, we'll just keep teaching you the next step. And that's how it's progressed. Yeah.
Awesome. So can you talk a little bit more about maybe what would be your recommendations then for, for the lay people who maybe don't have any meditation practice currently, but have heard, that it can be helpful? What are some of the basic first steps that people could do to start, whether it's getting educated or, learning more about how it might be valuable for them?
Sure. It was kind of fun. When we were in Texas for the ADP Icon,
Mhm.
we actually had a wonderful side discussion on exactly this topic, and it's great. And I love this question because the question I pose back is, well, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And we see this a lot in our society right now. There's an idea of meditation that's out there. I'm not going to say that it's wrong, but it serves a specific purpose in a very narrow field. So for a lot of folks, if they're simply looking for a way to maybe create a little bit more space in their life between some of the thoughts and the feelings and emotions, this is, I think, a little bit of what you might be more prone to encounter. You're going to focus on the breath initially,
Mhm.
and you're really just going to sort of watch the breath go in and out with the correct posture. And for most folks, for what they're searching for, that's probably it. That's as much as they need and probably ever want to get into. Many folks have asked me like, "Oh, should I do it for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour?" I actually tell people, "Hey, try 2 breaths, just two." And they look at me like, "What about the time?" I was like, "Well, they're going to be 2 breaths, but here's the thing: you're going to do 2 breaths where you're fully present,
Mm.
and you're not going to count the breath." Well, how do I know if I've done 2 breaths and I haven't counted it? You're going to be so in that space and you're going to be so integrated with the breath, you'll know when you've done two, but you're not actually counting. And so if you have a thought that comes in of, oh, I'm breathing in, that's not it. Okay, so I'm watching the breath going in. There's about, nope, that's not it. And you're just completely present, completely focused, noting the sensations, feeling the rise, feeling the fall, and you're just there. If thoughts and feelings pop up, they're noted and they're not hung onto. There's no attachment to them. And you just watch them dissolve, do what they're going to do, and you stay focused on the breath. But just for two.
And most of us would probably struggle really hard to get 2 breaths.
Just 2 breaths. It's very
Yeah.
challenging. And that was actually the introduction that I had.
Mhm.
And they gave a specific letter symbol that they use as kind of an anchor point to kind of help you with that. And then they're like, okay, well, you have to do it, for this set number before we're even going to move you to the next step. If one wants to get more involved, then there's a number of things that need to start kind of coming together. In that case, there's this idea of you're looking for qualified teachers.
Mhm.
So, and you have to be very, very careful with that selection. Any internet search, I think, would turn up, a number of very tragic stories where you can see what's happened when you have less than, say, ethical or morally unsound teachers,
Mhm.
and some of the very harsh things that have happened with students as a result. So there's a vetting process because you're looking at this person and you're looking at the qualities that they living and have embodied, and you're realizing, okay, I have that potential too, and I'm going to trust my education, my teaching, my devotion on this path to this person that's going to keep me here so that I can achieve those qualities. And they're also going to let me know, hey, you know, you're not living up to it on this day, and you need to straighten some things out. That's a big ask. But that starts to get much more involved, and then you're really going to be looking at a lot of things that are happening internally. And that process, I think some people have asked me about this in the past, and I've told them that process is not going to be gentle. And then the more years you've lived, the less gentle that process is probably going to be because you have ingrained patterns and habits that you're going to have to confront, and all of the things that maybe you've missed out on as a result of having those habits and patterns that are not allowing you to reach your full potential.
Mhm. It's interesting, even just in your description of what you were talking about in terms of like how to find a good, guide or teacher. there's so many parallels there between things that we have to do in the investing world and, particularly commercial real estate. We talked earlier about teams and like vetting partners and finding people to kind of go along this journey with and making sure that your values are aligned and, all of those things. Like it really is interesting how many parallels there are between the two.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, and if you think about it, right, if you're going to form a partnership with somebody in real estate, you want to know that those values align. If they're telling you one thing and you're looking at, right, maybe the way that they're breaking out their fee structure or their promote structure, it's like, okay, well, hang on, you told me you're all about the investor, but this looks like a fee and promote structure that's really based on compensating the sponsor, not
Mm.
the folks that are the LPs.
Not
What do you
maximizing
all,
their returns.
right? Like
Yeah.
what are you all doing here? There's a mismatch between the words and what you're saying. And in that very same process, if you're going to trust a mentor in the space, like, okay, well, do you have experience walking down this path of doing syndications, and how have those performed? What can you show me from your experience that tells me that me trusting my education and what will eventually be, my pool of investors
Hmm.
as a result of that, how do I know that the people who are trusting me to have developed myself and bring value to them in that space, that when I have invested and educated myself with you, that you are walking me down the path correctly so that I'm going to be beneficial to all of these folks around me. And so for me, right, it's, like, are you doing meditation or real estate? Yes.
All of the above.
All of the above.
Yes.
Yep.
No, I love that. I would love to hear more about your vision for providing housing for monastics. Like tell me more about that. Where did that come from and what do you see that looking like?
So that actually started way back before I ever got involved with meditation.
Interesting.
Um, what I had noticed before, we had a lot of stuff that happened in my family, situations with brother and just really rough decisions. And you start to see some different parts of maybe a city or areas that aren't necessarily the best through
Hmm.
a set of circumstances. And one of the things that continually came up was that anytime you looked around there, I would always notice, like, it didn't matter really how bad different parts of an urban area would get. You would always find some kind of, usually religious institution that was there trying to serve the needs of that community. And here in the States, that's primarily Catholic. There are Lutheran ones. I don't want to be say that there's not, but primarily the ones that I encountered were Catholics, and typically that's more of a monastic kind of foundation. And I noticed, I was like, wow. But I mean, you look at the places and they're not well resourced. And the more you kind of interact and talk with some folks in those communities, you find out, well, these folks have, given up all their worldly possessions in life, and they've decided to devote themselves to the spiritual cause. And part of that calling is working in these just very difficult, underserved places
Hmm.
here in the States. And wow, well, how do you help these people? Like, how do you help them help the community around you? And as a young adult, I didn't have an answer to that. And then as I, continued to go through my adult life, I started looking around and then I started meeting, some of these Tibetans and others. And then I found that there were even different delineations between whether or not it's, how the breakup will sometimes happen between male and female based on, cultural and societal components. And you start realizing it's like, and there's so many of these folks that they are trying so hard. They have given up everything that we would think of as success in this life to devote themselves to developing internally so
Hmm.
that they can turn around and serve their communities in the best possible light. And they're doing it sometimes just in clothes that are in tatters. They're doing it with whatever they have. They're not holding on to it. And I looked at that and I just kept thinking, what are we doing to support these folks? Like, this is exactly what we want people to be doing. We want to be helping each other. So what are we doing for these folks that have given up everything and they're not complaining about it? They're not out there, posting all over media about like their conditions. They're just doing the work.
Mm.
And so I started asking, then it got to be like a very passionate thing for me of, okay, what are we going to do? Like, how am I going to develop myself enough to be able to help these folks? as kind of the meditation pieces were coming into play, as the real estate pieces were coming into play, I looked at my day job and I was like, I am never going to make enough money working in a job doing these kind of things to be able to have the impact for these individuals that are out there doing this to make any real meaningful contribution to the world. Not that the work and stuff that I do isn't meaningful, but to really be able to help these individuals and to really get tangible benefits to the people that need it the most. What do I need to do? Where do I need to be? What changes do I need to make in my life to make that happen? And that's really where this vision started.
I love that. Now, what do you see that looking like going forward? Do you have particular types of housing that you'd like to set up, or, is it still kind of in development?
I started the process initially, and I started putting out feelers with different groups. And I said, hey,
Mm-hmm.
some folks that do mission work. Okay, they're going off to some pretty rough places in the world. What would they need? What would they need to support that and help folks? What would that look like? People looked at me, I haven't really thought about that. Okay. And I asked, I have a friend that does a charity for underserved youth, and said, okay, what does that look like to get started? And it was like, okay, we have this kind of structure, we do this. Okay. And as I looked at it, I said, okay, there's probably organizations that I can reach out and touch directly
Mm-hmm.
throughout all interfaith to make that happen. The more I started looking, I was like, okay, I have two choices. Either I'm going to have to expand a network and find all of these different groups that do this, or as the real estate investing continues to scale and grow, then the logical progression will to be actually to set up and an interfaith, non-denominational charity.
Mm-hmm.
That charity is going to be a direct arm with its own staffing that is going to go out and find all of these groups as touch points, and then portions of all of the proceeds are going to be headed to serve those groups and start that process.
Awesome. I love that. I think the more that we can, have kind of that abundance mindset as we go into real estate investing and looking at how can we leverage, the wealth building tool that is real estate to make a true impact and have a significant difference. And, sometimes that can look like starting our own organization. Sometimes that can be partnering with others, but just looking at it through that lens of like, how can we not only provide for our families and provide for the, if we're doing apartments, like the families that are staying in the housing that you're providing, but how can we leverage that to also generate income that can go towards some of these larger, big impact efforts? So that's really cool. And I look forward to seeing where that goes as you continue to grow in your own business.
Yeah. You mind if I share like
No, go for
a
it.
motivating quote? And it's going to sound kind of dark initially, but it was one of the most meaningful things that I came across in the meditation space. And for those that are watching this, take some time to maybe think about this later. There's a very famous teacher, and the quote was, "From the moment you're born, you're dying." And if you really think about that for a moment, it's telling you to live every single moment of your life with purpose, because you don't know if you get to the next breath. You don't know if you get to tomorrow. You don't know if you get to, next week. So for me, someone asked, like, what are you going to, because it's funny. Someone's like, well, what if you don't, get to 10,000 or whatever? I was like, doesn't matter. The point is, start the process, because even if I fail and I only get to one, it's better than zero. And if I don't even get to one, I started the process with intent. And that's what matters more than anything else.
Totally. Very profound. I don't know that I could follow that up with anything, anything more thought-provoking or that's going to push people to really move the needle forward. But I think in addition to, really setting aside some time to think about that and dwell on that and figure out like, what does that mean for you as you're taking the next step in your own journey, whether that's pursuing real estate or looking towards whatever is the next thing that's in front of you, approaching it with that perspective of purpose and intention and how am I, what am I doing today that's going to help me be the best version of myself so that I can have a positive impact on the world and the people around me. I want to talk about one more topic before we wrap
Sure.
things up, and that's sort of this idea of transition
Mhm.
And I know that you are still on active duty. And I think there are a lot of folks that I talk to, and I was one of these people as well, who I just really didn't know how much more I could have been doing while I was still on active duty. And I had a lot of limiting beliefs around, like, I had to wait until I retired before I could
Mhm.
start this next chapter. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on, like how you're approaching your, upcoming retirement potentially next year, I think. But how do you balance being on active duty and doing real estate, and sort of just what does that look like?
Very early days and late nights. That's a huge portion of it. The other one really is just finding time throughout the day. So for me, and this started, oh gosh, this probably started in the MMA when we were going through the multifamily academy, was really looking at the downtime during the day. So where was it that if I needed to make a 5 or 10 minute call to a broker to learn how to analyze a deal correctly, what could I do right now? What was the smallest, absolute smallest step that I could take? I didn't care how small it was. What could I do right now to keep moving forward? And one of the things I would start doing was I was like, okay, I've got, whatever it is, 30 minutes for lunch today, if I had that even.
Hmm.
Okay, well, I'm gonna eat quick and I'm gonna try to make 1 to 2 calls. And I would just go out to my car, boom, start calling somebody. I had a notepad with me. I'd write down some notes if I could, move on. Some of the days so I'm doing part of the miracle morning practice or in trying to get through all those components each day. A lot of that is, okay, I'm going to wake up at whatever time. And I have 2 small kids. So sometimes I get up at 5:30 and they're like, hey, congratulations. It's 5:35. We're up too, Dad.
Don't I know that?
Yeah. Like, thought I had an hour. I have 5 minutes today. Awesome.
Yeah.
So, but that's another part of it too. So starting the day, getting up with that very purposeful intent and setting that, and then saying, okay, especially one of the most helpful things I found in that is the scribing process, because in that I have a thing that's like, what am I doing today? And then what's one step I'm taking towards my goals? And I write down on there, and I try to have a couple big ones, and then I try to put one that is just, it's so small it almost seems trivial, but it's just about creating that and maintaining that momentum of accomplishment just every single day. And then the same thing at night. One of the things that I implemented throughout this was, okay, I can do a 10-minute analysis, or I can do something on those lines, review a deal, get back with something on the team. The other one was, okay, if I need to continue investing, some people, for a year will say, I want to read X number of books. And I didn't do that. I said, I've got, a huge stack and I don't want to be limited to that. I just want to read 10 pages a day. And if I read more than 10 pages a day, great. But my standard is just 10 pages a day. Then I try to come out of that with one thing that's implementable from that. And so it might be, hey, here's a component for when I'm looking at how to analyze a deal. Here's a piece on a question to ask a broker or to a PM. And I just try to take that and put that into a Word doc, into any kind of screening or underwriting tool that I'm developing the next day when I have 5 or 10 minutes. And so it's just the tiny steps I can take each day.
Yeah, I think that consistency of action it's hard to, like, overstate how impactful that can be over time.
Mhm.
And I know I've found myself sometimes sort of like excusing away, like, oh, I only have a few minutes, like, it's not gonna be enough to make a difference today. But when you consistently put in, even if it is that 5, 10, 15 minutes every day, all of a sudden you look back and it's like, oh, like, I have made some progress over the last few months in terms of what I was working towards, even if it doesn't feel like on a daily basis I'm making a significant change.
Mhm.
Seeing that progress over time really, really does have a significant impact.
Absolutely.
That's great advice. I know myself, I struggle with the scribing piece. I've been doing Miracle Morning for like almost a year now, and
Mhm.
I've gotten pretty consistent with my listening to I do the Daily Fire with Brendan Burchard, and then I do plenty of reading, but the scribing and application piece is the first one to go if the schedule gets crazy. So I was just talking with somebody yesterday about how, like, I really need to bring that piece back into my daily practice and take that, whatever it is, that 5 minutes to actually write it down and implement the things that I'm learning about. because it's great to learn them, but if you don't give yourself the room to actually take action on it, then, what's the point?
Now I would say, because I started the Miracle Morning practice, and there were a number of the components, because meditation practice I have is effectively, daily,
Mhm.
multiple times a day. And when I heard Hal Elrod talk, they're like, "Oh, do this scribing thing." I was like, "I've never journaled in my life. Like, what?" I go, well, "How's this going to affect me?" Right? Because I was like, "Okay, well, whatever." I'm like, I don't know anything about it, so all right, I'm going to drop my bias on this for a moment and just try and see what happens.
Mhm.
And I've been absolutely blown away
Yeah.
because it has become one of these things where I'm like, this is so helpful. I'm like, why was I not doing this before? And I've really come to enjoy it. And every now and then I'll miss a day where I'm not able to scribe. And I find my day doesn't feel complete. And I started this back in November, and I am absolutely just shocked beyond words at to how much value I found on that scribing process, for organizing my thoughts and getting me through the day.
Yeah. I really appreciate you sharing your personal experience with that with us. For folks listening, if they would like to continue following your journey, where is the best place for them to find you?
Best place is on LinkedIn. I
Okay.
am I am terrible about social media, but I did make a commitment to myself that I would at least post on LinkedIn once a week.
I feel like you post pretty regularly on there, so
And that is the only social media that I regularly post on. I try to get on Facebook. My wife set up Facebook years ago for me. And so a lot of folks are like, how do I find you on Facebook if I'm not in your network? I'm like, I don't know. My wife set it up. I've never really done a whole lot with right now. My Facebook consists of me, wishing people happy birthday, and that's about it.
the best
But
thing that you can do is be present in the space that's most comfortable for you. So if LinkedIn is that, then,
LinkedIn's the one. Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
no need to go square peg round hole. Like
That's
just,
right.
yeah, be where you are and let people come find you. Okay, awesome. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us today and sharing your wisdom with us. I really appreciate you going kind of into detail on your meditation practice and kind of how we can take that and apply it in more of like a layperson way, but also how much of a parallel there is between the meditation and real estate entrepreneurship, and how that idea of like just working to become the best version of ourselves every day, little bit, small step at a time, can really make such a significant difference.
Thank you for having me on the podcast. Really appreciate the opportunity to share the experiences.
Yeah, it's been awesome. We really appreciate your time. And
Thank you.
thank you to our wonderful listeners for tuning in today to this episode and being a part of this community. If you found value in this episode, please hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. Until next time, remember that your path to financial freedom and the life of your dreams might be closer than you think. Take that first step and explore your possibilities. Stay tuned for more insightful episodes. And again, thanks for listening.